What's going on, guys? StarLight TCG here. We got StarLight Frank as myself and StarLight Matt.
How's it going, guys?
This is our new counter series. We're gonna go countering these decks in the best of 3 format, and this is gonna be the first of many. If you guys like it, let us know in the comments. But also, I want to give 2 huge shout outs with SpaceBearUnlimited. They did a video similar to this, countering all the other leaders. Obviously, when he went to Boba Fett, he said he didn't have a counter for it. So this is our take on countering Boba Fett, the green Command Boba Fett. And also another big shout out to World TCG. World TCG is the main inspiration for this, because obviously I was a Dragon Ball player first, then a Star Wars, and he's done videos like this, explaining on the side of Dragon Ball card game TCG. So we're gonna go into countering Command Boba Fett, probably the best deck in the game right now. Well, from what we know, you're probably gonna be seeing this at your locals, and anything regionals. This deck is top tier.
Right. And I was gonna say, and that's gonna separate our counter series, kind of be the in-depth we go behind these decks and the kind of strategies and thought process you should go into when you face this deck.
But yeah, this is going to be our super in-depth countering Command Boba Fett. And we're going to start off with the leader and base. Alright, so basically what leader Boba Fett is, when an enemy unit leaves play, you may exhaust this leader if you do already a resource. That is not an action, first of all. It happens automatically. It does not take an action to do it. So, pretty powerful.
Well, that's what they call a trigger effect. So it triggers when an enemy unit leaves play, they can trigger it in addition to completing whatever action was currently happening. So that's something to be aware of and a ruling to know.
And he has an epic action. If you control 5 or more resources, deploy this leader. Pretty crazy. And then on his attacking, or on his ground leader unit, he is a 4/7. And this unit completes an attack. If an enemy unit left play this phase, ready up 2 resources. Putting back resources, readying them up, continues your plays, and that's pretty powerful.
An important ruling to note on here too is it doesn't have to be his attack that completes the finishing of a unit that phase. If any unit on your opponent's side has left play that entire phase, then his effect will trigger if they choose to do so.
But getting 2 resources back, pretty insane. And on top of that, they always pair, well, most of the Boba Fett decks pair it with Energy Conversion Lab. Energy Conversion Lab is the base, green. Epic action, play a unit that costs 6 or less from your hand, give it ambush for this phase. Yeah, this is the best base in the game, hands down. And you pair this with Boba Fett, just getting resources back. His deck is pretty insane. And so we're going to go to the next slide, is the ground units. We got to go over the units and how they function in accordance to the deck. And these are the units we think that you got to watch out for. Obviously, the turn 1 plays, you have Greedo, 3/1 when he dies, deal 2 damage. Pretty good. Crafty Smuggler, 2/2 shielded. And then you have the 2 good unique units, Boba Fett and Bosk. Boba Fett is on attack. This unit is attacking an exhausted unit that didn't enter play this round. Deal 3 damage to the defender. Pretty crazy. Bosk, 4/5 ambush. When you play an event, you may deal 2 damage to a unit. This deck runs on events, as you'll see later in the slides. But
yeah, all these units are really strong. You'll see a lot of Greedos and Crafty Smugglers turn 1 on the ground side on the Boba deck. And Greedo's just very powerful to hit the base. He kind of pushes out this early damage that you have to worry about, and even if he dies, he has the potential to not only deal that 3 damage back to that unit, he can ditch a card from the top of the deck, and if it's not a unit, which they're going to be running a lot of their event cards in a Boba Fett deck, it can deal 2 damage to a separate ground unit, and that's just very, very incredible. That's a 5 damage potentially to something. And then obviously Crafty Smuggler being a 2/2 but shielded means that shield's going to be in the way, and it has potential to be partnered up with some of these cards to just be another problem that you have to handle as well. And then in addition, you have the Boba Fett and Bosk, and Boba Fett's just so strong, being able to do basically 6 damage to a unit, comboed with some other cards as a 3 cost is just insane, and he's a 5, so he's hard to get rid of, especially early game. And then that's kind of it for him. Just a very, very good card. Boss, if you see Boss come out, be aware that they're probably trying to partner him up with some kind of unit to do another 2 damage. Or some kind of event. When Boss comes out, they're going to be partnering up with an event to do 2 damage to a unit, which is very, very strong.
So yeah, these are the cunning ground units that Boba Fett, you will see most likely they'll play. And then for the other units, we have the command units. Super Laser Technician, Steadfast Battalion, and of course, Darth Vader commanding the First Legion. Super Laser Tech is, when defeated, you may put this into play as a resource and ready it. Pretty wild for 3. Steadfast Battalion for 5. Overwhelm on attack if you control a leader unit. Give a friendly unit 2/2 +2/2 for this phase. And then you have Darth Vader, the big man, the boss. 7 cost ambush when played, search the top 10 cards of your deck. Any number of Imperial units you may, with combined cost of 3 or less, play each of them for free.
Important things to note for each of these units: Super Laser Tech has a high chance of them using ECL to get them out unless they draw resupply. Other than that, so I'll at least get the ECL out of the way, and then they're ramping. What's important to know about Steadfast Battalion is it obviously will come in with Overwhelm, so any excess damage it deals will go straight to your base, and then on attack, if you control a leader unit, you get to give a friendly unit +2 attack and +2 defense for this phase. And so some lines you'll see with that is they bring out Boba after they have ramped. That's going to be coming out turn 3, and they might partner it up with something like, if they still have ECL live, they'll bring out Leader Boba, and then they'll ECL Steadfast Battalion, take out one of your early cost units they haven't addressed yet, deal that excess damage to your base, and then buff Boba +2/+2 for that phase. Or they can buff Steadfast Battalion and do that damage to your base immediately with the Overwhelm, because it is a trigger effect, so they get to access it immediately, and it can buff its own stats and make itself a 7/7, which is just incredibly strong. An important thing to note with Darth Vader, and this is kind of getting into more rulings of the game, which is important to know, is that when they play Darth Vader, the ambush and when played trigger simultaneously, so they get to decide what they want to do. So every Darth Vader player who plays a Darth Vader unit card is going to activate the when played first, dig their deck, look for something they can play, and then decide if they want to ambush with that. So that's an important ruling to know. So if somebody says, hey, I'm going to play Darth Vader and activate my when played first, and then you try and go, wait, no, don't you have to decide you have to ambush first? They actually do not have to decide that first.
And also, watch out. Energy Conversion Lab, the lab that you saw, pair it up with Steadfast Battalion or Super Laser Technician. Pretty insane and powerful combos. Next one we're going to go over is Space Units. You have 2 costs, Cartel Spacer. When played, if you control another Cunning unit, exhaust an enemy unit that costs 4 or less. Then you have the 3 cost 7th Fleet Defender. It's just shielded, 3/2. And then you have the other big boy, Fett's Fire Spray. When played, if you control Boba or Jango Fett as a leader or unit, ready this unit. So he comes in readied, and then his action for 2 resources, exhaust a non-unique unit. So the space isn't as stacked as probably the ground, but Fett's Fire Spray makes up for it by coming in ready and able to attack your base right off will.
So one of Boba's favorite things to fetch off Darth Vader is going to be that Cartel Spacer if they still have Leader Boba unit out or any yellow or Cunning unit out. It will be able to exhaust one of your units that cost 4 or less, so that's one of the combos with Vader right there. Of course, 7 Fleet Defender being a 3/2 with shield is incredibly good if they're trying to go more for that aggro strategy against you, and then you can't even handle it immediately unless you have something that can bypass that shield. An important line to know with Fett's Fire Spray, which is just such an incredibly broken card, is the fact that they can trigger ECL on Fett's Fire Spray, bring it out, and because the ambush and the when played are triggering simultaneously, they can choose for the ambush to happen first. So not only will your space unit die to Fett's Fire Spray, then it'll immediately ready up and be able to attack your base for 5 damage, and that is just so incredibly strong.
And then for the next, we're going to go over the event cards. Alright, so as you can see, there's a spot open right there. That's supposed to be Waylay. For some reason, Waylay will not show in this slide. I don't know why. I tried fixing it, and I don't know what happened, but think of Waylay supposed to be right there. But we have shoot first event, one cost trick. Attack with the unit gets +1/+0 for the attack and deals its combat damage before the defender. If the defender is defeated, it deals no combat damage. Surprise strike for 2, attack with a unit, and it gets +3/+0 for this attack. And then you have, of course, No Good to Me Dead. 2 cost, exhaust a unit. That unit cannot ready this round, including the regroup phase. And then Waylay. Waylay is a 3 cost event. Basically, you could any unit, non-leader unit, any unit you can put back into the opponent's hand, return it to their hand for 3.
Yeah, and some important lines to note when it comes to these cards. Going into shoot first, they'll be able to handle some problematic cards and keep their units on board. So even if you bring out, say, a Sentinel with 4 and they have a Greedo, shoot first will kill the Sentinel and the Greedo will stay on board alive. Yeah, that's just incredibly strong. Being able to remove your units and keep their units on board is just such a good form of control, and it's a very, very good card. And even if they don't see much play with it against you, they may just sideboard it out, and it's just such a good card to have access to, and it's a good option. Surprise Strike is usually used to handle problematic cards or go for a game and push damage for game, and so being able to buff anything for +3 means if you're at 5 or less health and they got a 2 attack out there and they have 2 resources, Surprise Strike might just be what finishes you off. And so that's pretty powerful in its own right. Going into No Good to Me Dead, they're going to save this card usually for your leader. And so what that means is the moment your leader comes out, they're going to No Good to Me Dead your leader. It gets exhausted immediately. And then the next turn, or the regroup phase happens technically before, after the draw phase. And so before your next turn of being able to play units, attack, whatever, your unit will not be readied. So that leader is essentially exhausted for 2 whole action phases, which is just so incredibly powerful. Not being able to use your leader for 2 turns, and say you're playing with one of the higher cost leaders, that's just insanely broken. And if you weren't already down because of their amazing other units, you're going to be down bad after they hit you with the No Good to Me Dead. And going into Waylay, which is obviously not in the slide, but we're going to talk about it. Waylay is a bounce card, so it's potentially a threat for you playing anything. If you're playing more of a control strategy, you play an 8 or 9 cost card, they can bounce it back to your hand. And what's really more powerful about Waylay as well is it actually does trigger Boba. So going back to your hand counts as leaving play. So it can trigger the trigger effect of the Boba Fett leader.
Yeah, the No Good to Me Dead is the worst, is one of the best cards in the game. That's why I hate it so much. The only card I probably hate in this game, to be honest. The fact that it literally just stops your leader for 2 turns, like, that's absolutely insane. We'll go to the other event cards. The Command Event cards. Resupply for 3, put this event to play as a resource. It comes in rested also, so they can't spam it like Super Laser Tech, but pretty much a ramp card right there. And then you have the other ginormous boss card, Overwhelming Barrage. This card, 5 cost, give a friendly unit +2/+2 for this phase. Then it deals damage equal to its power divided as you choose among any number of those units. These 2 cards are pretty insane.
Yeah, so going into the lines for these cards, Boba Fett players ideally actually want to see Resupply over Super Laser Technician just to keep their ECL alive, which ECL is what stands for, it's the acronym for Energy Conversion Lab, which is the base we're talking about. That gives something ambush. So Resupply is just so powerful just to get another resource in there. They're a turn ahead of you. Boba's going to come out even faster than before. They're going to get access to their Fett's fire sprays faster. All their incredibly powerful cards. And so it's just so good. If you're running green, you run 3 Resupply. Overwhelming Barrage, on the other hand, it's a board wiper. It's incredibly powerful. It's going to give a friendly unit +2/+2, which is going to be a minimum of probably Boba Fett, the unit. And so that's going to be 6 damage dealt amongst your units any way they choose. It can be in space, it can be on the ground. It does not matter where these units are. They're going to be dishing out a board wipe and board control And not only that, that unit will stay buffed for that entire phase and be able to hit your base or hit another unit still buffed up and be harder to deal with because it also get that +2 defense. Overwhelming Barrage is one of the strongest cards in the game, and it's just incredibly powerful, and it's a game changer.
So pretty much we will be going over now the meta triangle, how we think the meta is at this current moment in time. Obviously we haven't had any regionals yet, which would give more accurate data, but I think we can predict that we have the meta triangle, aggro being at the top with Sabine, Iden being on the right side, and then Boba Fett being on the left side. So obviously in the triangle, I think aggro beats control, which is Iden. Iden does very good playing the late game, what control does. And we think control actually has a pretty good matchup against Boba Fett, which Boba Fett more plays in the mid-range area. 5 to 6, 7 resources is when it thrives and tries to kill you at those turns. And mid-range Boba Fett has a really good matchup against aggro, because it's not waiting as long as control does, so it will hit you back just as hard if aggro doesn't stop the units from being played.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so this is not representative of like, this actually is how me and StarLight Frank feel the best 3 decks in the game are. With that being said, this is obviously not representative of every aggro deck or control deck or mid-range deck. Obviously, besides Sabine, there's Leia red strategies. There are also some Luke red strategies out there. Control side, you're going to have more Krennics as well, and you're also going to have potentially some turrets and what have you. And then Boba Fett mid-range side, you'll also have Han Solo, and in addition, Thrawn. So we just feel as that these are kind of how the matchups are favored. You know, going into it, if you have a mid-range strategy, you can handle some of the aggression from aggro and dish it back to them. On the other hand, aggro will be able to attack and destroy a controlling strategy generally, just because they're playing for that late game. And control has a really good matchup against mid-range, because mid-range is trying to do a bit of both, but control can kind of stop the aggro side, and then if they're playing for the late game side, control is the better late game deck.
Alright, so now we're going to go over the strategies if you're playing the other two or other decks. Going against Boba, we think this is probably the strategies to go with. So for aggression, yes, the strategy is literally to keep fighting. Like, you're going to have to ignore these units here that we have on the screen. Honestly, yeah, Greedo might be annoying because it's 3 cost. Boba Fett might be annoying because it's 3 attack. I mean, Boba Fett might be annoying because it'll attack into your exhausted units. But it's pretty important, especially in the early game, to literally, I think, to ignore these units, where they're not as important as the other units as you've seen the past slides. Like, there's some units, like especially the leader, you have to answer to those directly. You have to answer the big bosses that come out, or else you will be dead.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's very thematic here to have Keep Fighting be the card that's representative of the aggression strategy against Boba. It's just to dish out that damage early. You don't have much of a way to control their units. I mean, you can handle some cards problematically here and there. You know, if you can handle a Greedo turn 2, if that's the best move for you, that's not necessarily the wrong move to do. It's just more so you're trying to make sure you can kill him before he gets to that mid-range to end game where he is going to dominate you. So step 1 is to win the die roll. Step 2 is just make sure you're dishing out that damage to his base and putting as much pressure on him as possible, which is going to make him want to address your units first. And so that's the strategy you definitely want to go with, and just that's the strategy your deck's built behind, so just stay true to it.
Also for aggression, just basically treat it as a race to and putting their base to 0. As you can see, just think it probably best to think of it as a race the entire match. Alright, and here are the strategies for control. Vigilance literally is the opposite. You gotta defeat all the units or else you will die. Because Boba Fett's also really good because of the fact that it can be very tangible. Like, it can play aggro if it wants to, it can play late game if it wants to. Boba Fett is very dynamic in that aspect. So if it's going against your control deck that you have, most likely Boba Fett's going to try and aggro you down quickly, because obviously Super Laser Blaster comes out, destroys everything.
When you have that control vigilance strategy, you want to make sure you have board presence that's seen and felt. You want to make sure you can get rid of some of those early units that might dish out too much damage for you to get to the late game. And so you're just kind of controlling the board presence, which is the control strategy, so you're staying true to that. Don't try and switch up and go into more of an aggro strategy. Stay true to the control methods. Make sure you have an out for Fett's Fire Spray. If you're playing control and you have a Power of the Dark Side in your hand, or a Vanquish or what have you, make sure you're keeping these cards live and preparing for some of their bombs. Do not waste them early on some of these lower cost units. That's an absolute mistake. Make sure you're saving it for these higher cost units, Boba Fett Leader, Fett's Fire Spray, and you're going to handle those cards with those removal cards. And then going to more of the control heroism side with Luke Skywalker, being able to establish some sentinels out there. That means they cannot attack your base and you get to that late game. That's going to be more of that strategy versus as much straight removal on the dark side control, light side control, or villainy control rather, and then heroism control. Are going to see more of these sentinels and just being able to affect what units can attack your base, and making sure they have to go to your units first, and you can establish that threat, and that way to get to the late game on the heroism side.
Alright, so we're going to go to some sideboard strategies that we think are really good, that we think will help your chances in beating this deck. Obviously in a best of 3 format. And for sideboarding heroism, we found these 2 cards to be pretty good. We have Chopper. So Chopper's at 1 cost. While you control an unexpected unit, its unit gains raid 1. You're not really using it for that, but you're using it for the on attack. Discard a card from the defending player's deck. If it's an event, exhaust a resource that player controls. Obviously, Boba Fett is playing so many resources. The fact that you make them discard probably a good good event card will now exhaust their resource, and now they won't have the 3 cost. Obviously, you want to play this Chopper in turn 1. If you win the die roll, you want to play this turn 1, take the initiative, and then attack with it. A lot of other counter strategies that Boba Fett will try to do is using ECL to kill Chopper, and honestly, that's probably the best bet you can get for that, because they won't be able to use it for other things like Super Laser Tech or Steadfast Battalion. So you want them to use their resources to kill this guy, because obviously it can be a pretty nasty threat if they don't answer to it, discarding, pretty much ending their resources.
So yeah, going into like the lines for Chopper, obviously you want to potentially hope you go first. You get Chopper out, they respond, you take the initiative. Going to turn 2, you're able to either hit, potentially a Greedo or their base, and then you trigger Chopper's effect, hopefully have them discard an event, and if they discard an event, you stop resupply or Super Laser Technician in their tracks turn 2, which is such an incredibly powerful combo. And because they're playing around 15 to 20 events in their Boba decks, you have a very high chance of being able to hit that line, and that just stops them in their tracks really hard turn 2.
Chopper, pretty good sideboard strategy, I think. The other sideboard strategy that we have, pretty much not for the early game, but could be used for the early game. You have Spark of Rebellion 2 cost event. Look at opponent's hand and discard a card from it. I've played tested with this card actually, and it was pretty good because turn 1 I didn't have anything but Spark of Rebellion, and I lost the die roll. So I played this card and I was like, alright, I'll just see what's in your hand. And there was a resupply, and I took out the resupply, and Boba Fett was not able to ramp, so it was pretty much a turn, well, how it's supposed to be played. 5 resources, not 4. So I think it's also pretty good with the fact that the turn Boba is coming out also. You play this card, you have the initiative, you play this card, look at their hand, overwhelming barrages in their hand, you could snipe that card out of their hand. Pretty much would save your units from being destroyed by that card. So Spark of Rebellion I think is a pretty good sideboarding card for this 4 against Boba Fett.
Yeah, going into the lines for Spark of Rebellion, and this is kind of representative by the dice next to it, is it can be an early game or a late game card, as StarLight Frank said. More in the late game, you know, you use it a turn 2 or turn 3, being able to get rid of their Fett's Fire Spray, Boba Fett unit, whatever card is going to be in their hand that's problematic for you, just being able to say no and develop that control strategy is so powerful, and it's such a good card. And if you're playing Cunning Heroism, you should be siding in Spark of Rebellion against Boba Fett.
Early game, though, Chopper is pretty powerful early game. You win the die roll, of course, early. And then Spark of Rebellion, anytime, any place, anywhere, you can use that card.
An important thing to note with Chopper as well is even if you don't hit it, let's say you would give you the line where you win the die roll, Chopper comes out turn 1, they play Greedo, and then in response, you know, you Chopper into either Greedo or the base. So let's say the base, you want to keep Chopper on board. You don't hit and you miss, and they still get to ramp. You know, Chopper will be live to basically say, hey, you essentially didn't ramp. Say I hit an event, the next time I attack with Chopper, and then I hit an event, it's like you didn't ramp and you're on that turn as you should have been normally. So don't be upset if you play Chopper and then you don't get it turn 1. It's still live.
Alright, and then we're going to go over the sideboard for the villains. So, just for the villains, we got Force Lightning, a 1-cost event. Choose a unit, it loses all abilities for this phase. Then if you control a Force unit, pay any number of resources, deal 2 damage to the chosen unit for each resource paid this way. So basically, any unit that comes out, you could pretty much wipe all its abilities. Any unit, leader unit, wipes stability, and then on top of that, if you are a Force deck, if you want to pay resources to take something off the board, you can. So Force Lightning is pretty good in that aspect.
Obviously, it's a 1 cost, so it's so easy to get access to, and you can essentially Force Lightning a lot of problematic cards in the Boba deck for you. You can Force Lightning Boba Fett the leader when he comes out, so he won't be able to get his resources back. You can Force Lightning Boba Fett the unit, so he can't dish out that extra damage he might have dished out otherwise to some of the units you control. And just being able to also add damaging those units to that is incredibly powerful, and it's a very, very good sideboard card in villainy aggression.
And for the other card, we have a unit, Del Miko, 3-cost unique. Restore 1. Each event an opponent plays costs 1 more. On turn 2, you play this guy. Pretty much stops surprise strike, stops shoot first, stops any event that Boba has that he wants to play that turn. Resupply, it also stops, makes resupply cost 4, and it wouldn't be able to use resupply that turn when Del Miko comes out. So they have to answer to this card, or else it's going to be pretty hard for them to play events.
Right. Being able to Del Miko turn 2 with initiative means their resupply is dead. You obviously do not want to see a Greedo on board before you do that, because that means Greedo's just going to wipe him out. But if they do not have Greedo on board and they have something like a crafty smuggler and they don't have a shoot first in their hand, they're not going to be able to do that resupply play that turn, and you're just putting them behind. In addition, it restores 1, which is not bad, and then 3 for 3/3 is a solid unit. So he's a good unit. He's more situational than some of these other cards we've talked about, but I do think it's worth, in a Boba matchup, it's worth running.
But yeah, now we're going to go over just sideboarding in general, not heroes or villains, but any sideboard card. So we have 5 cards here. So we got a 1-cost event, Force Throw. Obviously, a lot of people main deck these cards also that you see, but if you don't, we'll very advise you to sideboard these cards. But yeah, choose a player. That player discards a card from their hand. Then, if you control a Force unit, you may deal damage to a unit equal to the cost of the discarded card. So yeah, basically, you could choose Boba Fett if you know Fett's Fire Spray is in their hand. If that's the only card in their hand, you could use it to make them discard that, or make them discard anything in their hand, because Boba Fett doesn't really have too many cards in hand when they are playing, especially in the late game. So Force Throw is a pretty good card, I think.
Yeah, going into those lines, kind of like StarLight Frank said, when you save your Force Throw for the late game just to make them discard a card, it's just incredibly powerful because Boba Fett is constantly using his hand almost every turn. So when he has 1 or 2 cards left in his hand, chances are he's saving up a viable strategy with those cards. And so you're going to be able to snag one of those cards out of his hand just for a cost of 1 to you, and it's a very good trade-off.
And then for the we have a ground unit, 2 cost regional governor. When played, name a card. While this unit is in play, opponents can't play the named card. This is a pretty good turn 2 strategy. Like let's say you know the card they have in their hand, or you know they have you Viper Prone Droid and you know what's in their hand. You can regional governor the next turn and then call out whatever you think they're gonna play. You can call out resupply. You can call out super lazy technician. You can call out anything in those aspects.
Yeah, I would just say I completely agree. The line there is to Viper Probe Droid, and then turn 2, have the initiative and regional governor be able to name whatever play they were going to have. Otherwise than that, if you sideboarded in with blue and you're getting to the late game, or let's say to the mid game, you side it in with blue and you get to the mid game, you can definitely play it and call something such as Fett's Fire Spray or Overwhelming Barrage and stop that card or those cards in their tracks until they handle your regional governor, essentially treating it like a sentinel. And so that's very, very good as well.
And then we also have open fire. I pretty much see it as you got to have some kind of removal as well if you're going against Boba Fett. So if you're running an aggro deck that has no removal, I would suggest you change the strategy to running at least sideboarding open fire. If you just want to be a full-on aggro deck, probably your best bet to have something that can take a unit off the board, because the units will stack up, especially with Surprise Strike, giving +3 attack to any unit. Could be pretty dangerous. You're playing a dangerous game, and I think having some kind of removal will help you defeat Boba and have a better chance against the deck.
An important thing to know with the lines here is it's not going to defeat their units that are shielded initially, so that is something to be aware of. But if you can get some damage on some of their mid-range units, it'll be able to finish them off.
So the next event we have Make an Opening. Give a unit 2/2 for this phase, heal 2 damage from your base. This card, a lot of people aren't running it. I think they probably should, because giving a unit -2/-2 basically puts their defense to 0, and I believe when their defense is at 0, they're off the board. Even if they have a shield, even if they have experience tokens, well even if they have any upgrade, if that -2 puts them to 0, the unit is defeated. So, and on top of that, heal 2 damage to your base too as well is pretty good.
I'd like to add, giving you guys some lines once more, Make an Opening is just so incredibly powerful. Bye-bye Greedo, bye-bye Crafty Smuggler, bypass your shield. It does not matter. You hit 0 on your defense, you go to the discard pile. And so it's just such an incredibly powerful way to being able to remove some of these troublesome units for you, and also healing 2 damage from your base. It is a very, very good card.
And then we have Takedown for cost. Defeat a unit 5 or less remaining HP. So pretty much anything 5 or less will be taken down by this card. So this card is pretty good in the sideboard. Obviously you have either this or Vanquish. A lot of people are running. I'd probably find, if I was sideboard, I would probably sideboard this card in there somehow, some way, just to get rid of units that are 5 or less. Bosk, anything of those ground units, any of them, it just automatically defeats them regardless if they have a shield token or not. It just defeats them. So this card is pretty good.
Yeah, and I was going to say, in addition to that, I don't know if I would potentially sideboard Make an Opening and Takedown versus one of them partnered up with Vanquish, just because you want a way to deal with early game and those higher defense units, which would be in the forms of Fett's Fire Spray and Darth Vader. Takedown doesn't handle them unless you do some damage to them prior. So that's just important to note, and just be aware that those are your options, and these are just cards that can establish more of that control strategy that you're going for.
Exactly. So with that, pretty much ends this video. Thank you guys for watching. Any end notes on the Boba deck itself?
Thank you guys. We just gave you the complete rundown of Boba Green, and we hope going into your matchups now you have an understanding of what every card in the deck does, what are your strategies to counter it, what they want to do, and that's going to give you your best chance of winning that game.
Yeah, knowledge is power. Having the knowledge of Boba Fett, what he does. Again, restanding resources when your opponent, when your units are gone or leave the board. It's an automatic trigger that comes off. He'll restand energy every time, so be wary of that. You think he won't be able to play cards when he's tapped out, but rest assured he definitely still can, especially if his leader is already out there. He can play 2 or less, so just be mindful of that.
As you guys know, this is only the first episode in this series. Feel free to give us recommendations of what you want to see counters to next in the comments. Obviously, like and subscribe.
Yeah, and also comment if you disagree with anything, if you agree with anything. Yeah, just let us know what you guys think. So thank you guys for watching, and have a blessed, may the force be with you all.